Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Matt Cope, and Matt is the founding senior sales exec at Hire Genius. In addition to that, he's got several other amazing experiences as well that have led him to this point. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Hidesh?
Very good, thanks. Very good. Is there anything you want to add to your introduction for our listeners, give them a bit of flavor in terms of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off my career in recruitment, did about 5 or 6 years across a couple of different companies, from a very small boutique in the education sector, and then went across to an international big player Manpower group. Took that experience, went across into SaaS sales, helped to build the sales team over at Stint. And again, took that from a fairly early stage up to sort of quite a significant operation. And I'm now looking to replicate that in Hire Genius as well.
Amazing. It's great to have you on board, especially with your experiences of going at a relatively early stage and then expanding into a fuller size company as well. It'd be great to touch on that as well. I guess let's get straight into it. And it's probably a good place to start as well, is that experience going from being very, very early stage and seeing companies develop and grow. Speak a little bit about how your role evolves during that process as well, and what kind of skills are really important to allow you to succeed at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we take a look at Stint specifically, it was a wild ride. I think you can definitely put it that way. So if we look at, or even take a step back and actually think about why I moved across there in the first place, I found recruitment to be a really interesting, rewarding industry, but I wanted to go and, I guess, really take ownership of a product and taking that product to market as well. So I took quite a significant step back to go and become a BDR from a responsibility and earnings perspective. And all I knew is just what I wanted to be able to see the influence of my actions. I wanted to actually see, like, go back at the end of a day, end of a week, and actually know that you've made a real difference. And across my time at Stint, I must have had 4 or 5 different positions, from SDR, account exec. I helped to launch our Bristol and Bath marketplaces. I looked at, what else was there? Our product changed. Do you know what I mean? When you work in a startup, things are changing all the time. So we pivoted the product. We had to go and re-engage all of the companies that we'd worked with previously, who were now trying to sell this new dream to. When you look at the skill set and the traits of someone in that role, I think especially when you're working in younger companies, you need to be really driven. It's important to have a purpose as well. It's something that, again, ebbs and flows. Your purpose might change over the years as well, but really having that why at the forefront of your mind is something that's super, super important. Is what gets you out of bed in the morning. Motivation is temporary, but discipline and really sort of truly understanding that why makes a huge difference. And then I think it's just about getting stuck in.
So that's your own.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I was going to say, so that's your own personal why that you're talking about there, right?
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
opposed to the company's mission and the company's goals. How important is it that those two are aligned, and what is your why if it's not too sensitive?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you look at a company mission, it's important to align to it. Like if you don't back what the company's doing, especially in sales, it makes it really difficult to sell that product. If you don't truly believe that what you're selling is helping your customers and is truly providing something different or better, then I guess if you can't sell it to yourself, then how are you going to sell it to someone else? I think the personal why is different, right? It's slightly more selfish. It's slightly more, I don't know. So it can be more difficult to put your finger on it as well, right? But I think a lot of people think they're motivated by money or they're motivated by learning, but often it's a bit more in depth than that. Hopefully not too much of an interesting answer for you.
And Matt, you spoke about kind of having to be nimble when you're in early stage startups, and especially when you make your way through the ranks as well.
Yeah.
You spoke about discipline, you spoke about flexibility. But are there any other factors that you feel are extremely important in order to be successful at both, being a good individual contributors, but also enabling a full team to be successful?
Yeah, for sure. So if I look at building teams and flip the conversation slightly, like I read a book called Radical Candor, which is a really interesting read. I'd highly recommend it. And one of the things that I guess always struggled with is when I'm hiring people and when I'm looking for new people to join the team, I'm looking for people that are ultra driven, really pushing for the next big thing. And in the book, Kim Scott calls them superstars, right? They are the people that are always pushing for that next big thing. And that's how I would generally align myself as well. But on the other side of the equation, you've got these people called rock stars, and rock stars are very solid. They're very solid performers. They're not necessarily pushing for that next big thing, but just constantly working over and over again, maybe at the same processes. So I guess in answer to your question, it's depending on the stage of the company and what the makeup of the team is at that point in time, the skill set and the temperament and the kinds of people that you're looking for can change quite significantly.
How do you because I find this really hard, because when you're a sales leader, having become a leader because you were a good top performer, individual contributor, you're not equipped to do like really good interviews. For instance, hiring is really difficult and is a completely different skill set.
Yeah.
So how do you find those talents? Like, what process do you put in place to get the best candidates through the door?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So when I look at interviewing, I tend to set a fairly fixed process. So obviously you want to have a conversation the same way that we're doing right now, but you also want to level the playing field and try and remove as much bias as possible. We're all biased in some way, shape, or form, some more so than others, but generally we all have a level of unconscious bias. So I think having at least maybe 4 or 5 fixed questions you ask everyone so that you can really benchmark people against each other is important. When I am looking at what those questions are, I tend to do a few things, right? The first is actually understand what it is I'm looking for from a skill set, or more likely a traits perspective. It's not about necessarily what they've done before, but the sort of values that they hold. For example, hardworking or coachable, that drive or discipline, those sorts of things. And then you can then form questions that allow you to test for previous experience of that and ask competency-based questions to get them to give you examples. I think asking why is really important, and really sort of pushing back, even if you're happy with the answer. If you're asking why at least 2 or 3 times, or maybe in a slightly different form, so it's not an interrogation, then that can help you to reach a better, get a better understanding of it. But it's also recognizing that it's a two-way street. Like whenever you're interviewing someone and hiring someone, it's not just a big step for them as an individual, it's a big responsibility for you as an employer as well. And you want to be as confident as physically possible when you bring that person on board that you will be able to get them to perform. Because it's not all on the person. You need to have that solid onboarding process. You need to support them to make sure you can get them to where they need to be and to perform at a level that allows you to build a really mutually beneficial relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting what you said there regarding the traits versus the experience as well. From, what at the company Mick and I worked at together, actually, one of our most successful SDRs had very, very little experience, was relatively young as well, but actually his traits were amazing and it reflected in the work he did and the results that you're driven as well. So I think that's a really great point. Yeah, just moving in a little bit of another direction as well, I guess, the question on everyone's mind really is, what are people doing to address the macro challenges that people are facing in today's climate? So, everything's a little bit harder at the moment. There's more stakeholders involved in the sales process. Things are taking longer. What are you seeing at the moment in terms of strategies that you could potentially deploy to support in this process?
Yeah, it's a good question. So at the moment at Hire Genius, we sell primarily into the SMB space. So we're selling to directors and founders of generally sort of smaller and boutique agencies, so up to maybe sort of 50, 60 heads. Some bigger, of course, some smaller. But at the end of the day, like the way that I view sales is part art and part science. The art is about how you communicate and your tone and how you structure your conversations, but there is so much process behind it. And I think the aim of many sales leaders is to essentially build repeatable processes. And you're not necessarily building a machine like how some people phrase it. It's not that predictable. At the end of the day, we're dealing with humans, so there's always going to be a level of risk and uncertainty there. But it is about recognizing like what processes work. An old manager of mine, Jez Rawlinson, as well, when I was back at Stint, the COO over there, he talked a lot about levers, and that's something that I've taken with me into this role, and I'm sure I'll take with me moving forward as well. And it's about recognizing that when you have a specific challenge, what levers can you pull, or what strategies can you deploy to counteract that? And sometimes you can get quite creative with it as well. So it really is as simple as, if you recognize you are losing, or you're winning opportunities when you've got multiple stakeholders engaged, and you're losing opportunities where you don't, then okay, let's have a think about what levers we can pull and what strategies we can deploy. Like, do we want to, I don't know, ask for introductions from our champions sooner in the conversation? Do we want to just be sending them an email to say, hey, FYI, here's a recording of it? Or maybe I want to pick out a snippet from the initial discovery or demo with that really sort of key pain point, and then maybe a response with how you can maybe quantify the impact that your product can have. So again, it totally depends on the company, it depends on the market you're selling to, but it's all about just sort of taking a common sense approach to it. If something isn't working, okay, what can we do to fix it?
How do you do that?
Yeah,
So I think one of the challenges for early day companies is they want to build a process, and yet they want to have it scalable, so repeatable process, but they don't have any data points or closed-won revenue or enough of to kind of work backward from.
Yeah.
So how do you do that essentially the wrong way around?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we did something similar when I joined Hygienius as well. We did a sort of bottom-up, and if we're looking at targeting specifically, we did a bottom-up approach, which was, okay, how much can we physically do in a day? And then we put in place sort of benchmarks and, I guess, forecasts. Right? You need to speak to someone who has a level of experience, ideally selling in that market, if not just selling in general, so they can give some good guesstimates to it to start off with. And then you can flip it on its head and do a top-down approach as well. And say, okay, we want to make, I don't know, £1 million in revenue this year. Okay, so what's our average deal size? Or what's it been so far? Okay, it's how many deals do we need to do over the year, and how many demos we need to do to get that point. And what you often find is that both of them are quite a way off from each other. But if you go for a middle ground sort of approach, then that's a nice starting point. And once you start putting in place these strategies and start actually doing the job, you can measure your the percentages as you go through as well. So your forecast can get significantly more accurate within a week, within a month, within a quarter. So that's sort of one piece of it. I think the other piece as well is, like, just give it a go. Like, I'm a big believer that when you're selling, you should be really like nailing your ICP. So really knowing who your customers are, knowing what sorts of people do you want to be speaking to. But again, it's like, you're not always going to know that straight away. So start broad, look at what's working, do more of that. And if it isn't, do less. Like, it's really, really simple.
Yeah. How often should you, so that I love this conversation because that's exactly what we are doing internally as well. The question mark is, how often do you review the numbers? Do you analyze the success? And how fast do you then put a B plan together? Or do you keep on essentially going in that same direction to find out whether actually this was just a mistake or bump on the road or the overall trajectory?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on what you're implementing. So let's take an example being an email marketing campaign, right? Or a marketing agency in general. So you start working with an email marketing company, and it's unrealistic to you might want good results from day one. You might get good results from day one, but it's unrealistic to expect that within a week you're going to know your business, you're going to know your customers, and they'll be delivering really sort of expert work for you. For something like that, it's a process. So if we're looking at a marketing agency, we might give it 3 months, for example, and we might review and refine it as we go through. But yeah, it takes a bit of time for those sorts of things to really sort of prove their worth, if they are worth anything. So you need to commit to stuff for a good amount of time. But when it comes to just like general strategy and general sort of day-to-day activity, you can split test all the time. Like, generally, if you're looking at scripts or you're looking at emails again. What emails are you going to send out? What LinkedIn messages hit home? A/B test. Stick half with what you're doing at the moment, and then half not with something necessarily brand new, but something with a slight tweak on it, and then you can quickly refine and see what's working and what isn't. Personally, when it comes to conversion metrics and just general activity metrics, I track that weekly, and I can look at my week's performance and benchmark that against my average, generally for a quarter or for a half year, depending on how much data I've got. And if you color code it as well, you can very quickly see, okay, what's improving and what's getting worse.
Yeah.
It's important to look at as well, just sort of final point on this, when we're looking at conversion metrics, if you are seeing a 2% increase on a 10% conversion metric versus a 2% conversion increase on a 90% conversion metric, one has a 20% overall impact on your bottom line, and one has a very, very minimal impact on your bottom line. So I'm always looking at where my conversion metric is the weakest, and that's where I'm going to be able to have the greatest impact when it comes to improvements, something that I think often gets overlooked.
Yeah, no, I think that's very thorough and very logical as well. Makes complete sense. And something you mentioned earlier on as well, when we were talking about, I guess, navigating the conversations with your prospects was, one of the elements was, should I be asking my champion for introductions earlier to additional stakeholders and things like this? And one of the things that I think I see, I've struggled with myself and I know other people struggle with as well, is when do you ask for permission to communicate with that additional stakeholder? It might be somebody's line manager, it might be someone in the C-level. And when do you just go and bypass your champion and go through an email introduction? So, someone else we had on here mentioned that what they actually do is just inform their champion. Hey, I'm going to be sending an email to so-and-so, just keeping them up to date. Just thought I'd let you know. And, for me, sometimes I'm okay with it. Sometimes I'm not, depending on my relationship with the champion. What do you think works well in terms of bridging an introduction to those additional stakeholders?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think the first, if I agree with what the other person was saying about not necessarily asking for permission, but informing, I think that's it's about maintaining control as well, right? Like, exactly. It's polite to inform them, but also you're not risking them saying no. It's like, okay, what do I do now? They're back to square one. Another thing to think about as well is about which level you're pitching and approaching in the first instance. So I think people often might be looking to get to director level or C-suite level, but they may feel apprehensive about how that would be received. So they go for a head of and try and work their way up. And I think it's important to get buy-in from multiple levels of business, especially on those enterprise level deals. But there's nothing stopping you from approaching that person you actually want to be speaking with in the first instance and then getting them to pass it down the chain. And I think also, like, as you move up the chain of command, to put it slightly crudely, the pain can get amplified. Like, the people at the top are the ones that are genuinely feeling the pinch. And I think, a lot of the time it's them that's really, really in the firing line, and it's their responsibility to protect people lower down. So yeah, try and go for them in the first instance. But I think another thing that often gets thrown around is the term champion. And we say champion, but like, what have we actually done to test that? If let's flip it. Like, if you're asking or informing your champion that you're going to bring this other person involved in the process because it's going to have a better chance of success and that it's going to deliver better outcomes for them, and they say no, it's like, okay, are they even a champion? Obviously not, because if they were, they'd be supporting you. Like, your champion is the person that needs to be selling this internally, need to be providing them with tools and levers to be able to go and do that. And if they're not willing to help you, then I think you should probably reassess the name you've given them, because they're not.
Nope.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. And so one of the things you mentioned here really is about testing that champion, right? You ask for an introduction. If they're not willing to make it, they're probably not the champion to begin with.
Yeah.
Talk through some of the ways in which you're able to successfully test the champion to see that they are legitimate and they are who they are. What works well for you?
You're almost in an interview process here, Matt.
I know. Feeling the pressure. Looking at if I'm a joint flows champion, which I am, of course. But, yeah, when it comes to testing, there's a few things. Right? I think the main one is people doing what they say when they say going to do it. That to me is the biggest one. Like, do they turn up to the meetings? Are they on time? If they say they'll get back to you with some information, do they get back to you with that information? And I appreciate that people are busy, but if someone genuinely wants to buy your product and genuinely sees the value in it, then they're going to want to support you in that process. But the other thing is just those small asks, like you talked about already, right? It's like if you're asking for an introduction, you're asking for advice or guidance and support, and you're not getting that, then like that to me is an indication that maybe they're not the champion. Other things, introductions to other people, referrals, all these sorts of things are all ways of understanding, is this someone that genuinely backs you, that's there to support you, or are they just sort of along for the ride?
Yeah, always get that test in early, I say.
Yeah, and continue with it as well, right? Like this isn't a one and done exercise. This isn't for example, we all talk about time kills deals. You might have a champion at week 1, but they might not be a champion at week 5 or the end of Q1, because priorities change. People have stuff going on in their personal lives. Again, takes different priorities. So it's something that you need to be constantly, not necessarily testing, but just conscious of, right? When you have concerns, okay, let's push back a bit more, but sort of never letting that leave our minds.
And Matt, obviously you do it personally, and that's why you've got amazing results. And how do you transfer this knowledge onto perhaps someone that is maybe less natural at finding this logical and actually proactively going into these kind of conversations? And how much of that knowledge is transferred theoretically, so like in the training room, versus on the field?
Very good question.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to pause and have a think about that one. So something that I've been saying I will do for a very long time, and have started doing, but it's a long process, it's just making a note of all of the things that I find valuable, whether it's something that you say in this conversation or a post I read on LinkedIn or a comment that someone makes at a networking event. I make a note of it and I start to structure that into specific categories. And from that point, when I identify challenges within my team or within my organization, I can start looking for resources that can support them, be it a book or be it physical training. I think theory is important from a training perspective. So you can look at, like we were talking earlier about art and science. From a science perspective, there are absolutely things that you can do that will immediately improve your results from tomorrow, right? And that's often why people that have been in a job for longer have more experience and are generally more effective at doing their job. Not always, they might have lived the same year over and over again, but it is often the case. But I don't think anything also replaces like being there and living it. So an example would be watching a demo back versus being in the room with that person when you're doing the demo, and you can look at their body language and their eye movements and all of those sorts of things. Really, really important. And I think the final piece is also looking back at those sort of remedies. So an example I'll give you is I had someone that really struggled with what was it? The tone on the phone. It was very sort of monotone, really, really struck. Oh, my one.
So Matt, yeah, the question is about, for me, is how do you transfer that knowledge and how much of this is done theoretically, so in the training room, versus on the field?
Yeah, good question. I'll have a little pause and think about it first before I dive into it. So I think in any situation, you need to have a mix of both, right? If we link it back to what we were saying earlier about the art and the science, from a scientific perspective, there are sales strategies and theory that you can train someone on today, and if they implement it tomorrow, it will have a really sort of sizable impact in regards to their outcomes. So that theoretical classroom training, like you talked about, is really, really important to make sure you're upskilling people. But I think from a coaching perspective as well, I think practical on-the-job training, really like living it as well, right? Being with them in the room when it's taking place is really, really valuable. But I think it's also like if we link it back to these levers that we were talking about earlier, that there's other strategies that you can put in place above and beyond the sort of typical training. So if I give you an example, I had an SDR previously, interviewed really well, really struggled on the phone with his tone and I guess just how he held himself during those conversations. And we could look at call coaching, we could do mock calls, we could do all those sorts of things. And sure, he'd get better over time, but the strategy I put in place there, which is I think quite a fun and interesting one, is how can we get better at tone? Children's books. If you think about how a parent reads to a child with a children's book, and also the confidence piece on it as well, like you're there, they're written in a way that really allows you to deliver the message emotively. So I went to the market in Canada and I bought a book called Mole of Mole Hill, which is about a mole whose home gets invaded by diggers, and he's basically trying to fight his way to keep his place. And we started off and we'd read it to each other, line by line, page by page. And after about 20 minutes, it was really confident with the book. Again, really simple. It was about size 50 font. And so we looked at the two challenges. One was tone and one was confidence. So what we did is we got the office together, obviously with his permission, because you don't want to sort of make people feel too uncomfortable. It's good to feel sort of slightly uncomfortable and out of your comfort zone, but not too much. And he read Mole of Mole Hill to the team. And it's little things like that that can really help you just be more conscious of the challenge that you're facing. But also make it a bit more fun, like get it to stick, and we sort of bring up that morale in the process as well. Massive impact, but it wasn't cold calling coaching. Do you know what I mean? So
very good idea.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit of a team bonding session as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's like
the initiation song you get when you join a team. So pretty much the same thing. That's a great idea. I might write that one down. A question I had for you as someone who's built up teams, right? So, you've worked your way through the ranks of companies before, and from an SDR through to a leader. When you look to, in particular, transition from an SDR to an AE, what do you look for in terms of that individual skill set to be able to transition on the role? Because it's not always the case that if you're good at one role, you're going to be good at the other.
Yeah.
And in what instance do you then say, actually, I'm better off going externally and bringing someone from outside into my AE team instead of promoting an SDR?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's something that I feel quite passionately about as well. Great SDRs don't always make great AEs, and great AEs do not always make great SDRs. There is obviously an overlap in skill set. They're both sales. You both have a lot of similarities there. But what you're asking people to do is very, very different. So let's think about the question, right? So from an SDR to AE perspective, you'll look at specific traits, right? There are specific things in regards to, I guess, curiosity, organization, various other things from an AE perspective, I think are more important. Again, depends on the company, depends on what you're selling, depends on the transactionality of it. But you can, again, if people want to get to that position, you can look at your training, you can look at your coaching, you can look at how you can support them. It's your responsibility as a manager. If they want to get there and you don't facilitate that, then you might lose a really key player to someone else. But the other thing to consider as well is you also need to, as a manager, it's your responsibility as a manager, give people opportunities to stay within their lane. And I'm not saying that from a negative perspective. I'm not saying you should just be an SDR, you should just be an AE. But I think we live in this world where the majority of SDRs think, oh, the next step for me is to become an AE. And that's absolutely not the case. SDR to me is, in a traditional SaaS model, which again doesn't always work, is one of the most important roles. Like if you can't generate initial interest and your AEs aren't doing that as well, you haven't got a business, you've got no money coming in. So it's important that you can support and reward SDRs for the work that they're doing and offer them opportunities for growth and learning and progression, whether it be financially or personally within that role. So same for AEs, same for leaders. And it links back to a question that Mick asked earlier. Fairly early on in the conversation, he talked about the challenges of sort of ICs moving to managers. Great ICs do not always make great managers, and vice versa. Like it's very, very different skill sets, especially in the sales realm. If I look back at my recruitment time and I looked at the consultants that were generally very, very strong performers, their temperament, their attitude, their values were not just different, but sometimes polar opposite to managers. And you can end up in really tricky situations where great ICs would become managers and everything start crumbling because they were still living in this world where it's very much sort of me, as opposed to like trying to give as much as possible to everyone else. So I think having that opportunity to allow people to progress into management, or allow people to progress into different roles, or just allow people to progress vertically within their current position it's important to have all of those options on the table. Great for retention as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I often think it's important that you're thinking, 6 months out, making sure the handover is going to be correct. If you move an SDR to an AE, you want to make sure there's not going to be a big dip in the number of opportunities that are going to be passed through. But at the same time as well, it's about recognizing the skill gap and training them, upskilling them during that period of time, so the transition can be as smooth as possible as well.
And if you've got a team already, though, like there's no reason why the SDR can't be sitting in on discos and demos with the current AE, right? Or watching some of them back after hours, or delivering feedback. Let's imagine an SDR delivering feedback to an AE on something like that. They're going to have such an interesting and unique perspective on it. And within that 6, 12, 18 months, however, or 3 months, whatever it is, whatever that transition period looks like they can be starting to do that job and starting to learn the role itself before they're actually doing it full time, if that's the direction they want to go in.
Absolutely. I'm a big advocate for that, sitting in on calls, like 1 or 2 calls a week, sit on it and absorb. Absorb all the information.
100%.
It's really, I think that's the first time we speak about this, but you don't have to move up the ladder. Like you can be extremely good at what you do and stay at that level for a very long time. And I find reassuring that you've got older SDRs now on the market, like 40, 50-year-olds, and they're SDRs and they are really good at it. And they just want to be an SDR. And it's not like it's not pejorative. It's not, it's good. Like that's what they want to do. But how do you, and it's probably the last question before we wrap up. So how do you build that career path early on so that you don't push people down the wrong path just because that's the norm?
Yeah, I think visibility is really important. So you can look at, there's loads of resources out there online on this as well. And if not, send me a message and I'll be happy to share some stuff. But you can look at progression frameworks is one. And you can essentially map it out. It's more of an HR type thing, but map out all of the different routes that you can take. So this role goes to this role, or goes across there, or goes off in this totally different direction. And again, when you're having your one-to-ones and when you're having conversations with your team, really get an understanding of where they want to reach and where they want to get to. You can put competency frameworks in place as well. So you can have, they can be specific to the role, or they can be generic to the organization based on the level of skill that each person holds within the sort of key values that you have, or key skills that you need for each of those positions. But I think having visibility of all of the options that people have available, and having really frank and open and honest conversations with people about not just all of the good bits, but all of the bits that aren't going to be enjoyable, and the disappointment they'll feel in different jobs, and the ways that they'll feel that disappointment is really, really important. But also, I think when we're bringing new salespeople into sales, not everyone shouting that you have to go SDR, AE lead, manager, head of, director. That is a progression path, but like celebrating all of the roles for their uniqueness, and being an SDR is great. It's great fun. Like you get to speak to people all day long. You're a detective as well, right? Like there's loads, it's really fast paced. There's loads of good bits about all of these different positions. And I think just like celebrating people and supporting people, and just like allowing people to enjoy their day to day. And also giving people the opportunity to make a mistake. I've seen people that have gone from SDR team lead, didn't work out, AE didn't work out, back to SDR, and they're making 6 figures. Like you can do really well in any job in sales if you become an expert at what you're doing.
Yeah, I actually know a guy who went from SDR to AE, and after a while he said, actually, I'm not ready for it. He went back to SDR, and I think it was a year later. Mick, you know the person I'm talking about as well, actually. About a year later, or 2 years later, even, I don't know, he moved back into an AE and he absolutely smashed it.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely nailed it.
That's performer. The other thing. Timing might just be off, might just not quite be ready for it, or something's happened in personal life that means they've got to delay it. Like, no problem. The world of work.
Absolutely. Matt, it's been great having you on. We do have a bit of a closing tradition in terms of a final question. It's quite generic, but some of the answers are amazing. So the question is, throughout all of your career, which has been amazing to date, what is your favorite memory so far?
What a good question. There's too many. That's what I'm thinking. It's not I can't think of any.
Are you outside of
He's,
the podcast, obviously?
Oh, is it? Okay. For me,
he's,
I think it was the buzz of that first deal, right? Not the
yeah,
commission, not anything else, right? It's not the money. Although I thought I was very financially motivated. It was doing that first placement and knowing that you've absolutely smashed it. Like you've managed that whole process. You've taken it from being nothing to money on the table for your company. And for me, in the recruitment setting, someone else getting a job that they really enjoyed, they're still at now. And it's going to feel soppy, but that sort of warmth you feel when you know you've done a really, really good job.
Yeah.
And that to me is part of the why that we talked about earlier. It's like knowing that you've done a really, really good job.
Nice. Well, you're
that's a
hired.
great answer.
You're hired, Matt.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
The interview. Awesome. Well, Matt, appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure. This has been a Revenue Revolution podcast sponsored by Joint Flows. Until next time.
See you later.